Question time, and I will call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I inform the House that the Attorney-General will be absent from question time at least for today, and the Minister for Communications will answer questions on his behalf.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister update the House on the efforts being undertaken following the tragedy of the MRH-90 Australian air helicopter crash off central Queensland last Friday?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question and for the Leader of the Opposition, but I think every member of this chamber joining with us today on what has been a very difficult weekend for our nation. As the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chief of Defence Force made clear earlier today, our worst fears have been confirmed. I know that every member of this House, along with every Australian, is thinking of the families of Captain Daniel Lyon, Lieutenant Maxwell Nugent, Warrant Officer Class 2 Joseph Laycock and Corporal Alexander Naggs. 4 men who made the brave and selfless choice to serve our country, to dedicate their lives to keeping us safe. They were soldiers and they were sons, husbands, brothers, fathers and friends. And today our deepest sympathies are with the people who loved them and the people that they loved. We will have, of course, a formal condolence motion at an appropriate time for them. We are also thinking of all those who served alongside these 4 men who remain missing. The members of the 6th Aviation Regiment based at Holsworthy Barracks in Sydney, and indeed all of their brothers and sisters in uniform, many of whom are continuing to assist in the search and recovery effort. I know the House will want to join me in acknowledging the vital support that Canada and the United States of America are providing to the efforts of the Australian Army, Navy and Air Force, as well as the civilian authorities led by the Queensland Police Service and the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. Our nation offers them all the strength that we can while their difficult work goes on. It is important for us to recognise that this will be a very hard time for many serving members and their families, as well as veterans. And I encourage anyone who feels in need of support to seek it. Families can call Defence Member and Family Support on 1800 624 608. Serving men and women, veterans and families can contact Open Arms on 1800 011 046. Mr Speaker, this terrible incident has provided a stark reminder that there are no safe or easy days for those who serve in our country's name, or indeed for their families, for they also serve. The Australians we mourn today were taking part in Exercise Talisman Sabre, bringing together 13 nations and more than 30,000 personnel. An unprecedented display of strategic cooperation and coordination driven by a common determination to preserve peace and security in the Indo-Pacific, but also the wider world. This was the noble ideal that these 4 Australians volunteered to serve, uphold and defend. Mr Speaker, all Australians owe a debt to the brave men and women who wear our uniform, citizens who risk their lives in order to protect our way of life. On behalf of our nation, we offer our sympathies and condolences to the families, friends and colleagues of those who Australia has lost. We mourn them, we will remember them, lest we forget.
And I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much. Mr Speaker, I want to thank the Prime Minister for the update to the House, and as the Prime Minister points out, there will be a more formal opportunity for remarks in relation to the condolence motion, but it is important that the country hears a very unified message from the government and from the opposition on dark days for our country. I want to say thank you to the Defence Minister and to the Defence officials that briefed us earlier today in relation to this tragedy. The work, as the Prime Minister points out, of the search and rescue effort, those diggers who were on board the MRH-90 that followed this helicopter that abruptly, violently hit the water, the tragedy that they experienced at that time and what they will be going through now is something that we acknowledge as a parliament. Our country comes together during these dark hours to make sure that we can provide support to those in need of it. And the Australian Defence Force today, particularly those who are serving in the 6th Aviation Regiment, are worthy of our support, and they should know that this parliament will come together to provide support in this next phase. But to the families of Daniel Lyon, of Max Nugent, of Joseph Laycock and of Alexander Naggs, now our thoughts and prayers are with them and with the diggers. I want to acknowledge the work of the member for Herbert, who I know has been in contact with a number of his former colleagues and has served at one point with Corporal Naggs, and many people will have similar stories. But it is a tragic day for our nation, and we will continue to work, I know, to provide the recovery effort so that the answers can be provided to the loved ones, to their colleagues. But we come together today on an incredibly sad occasion, a tragic occasion for our nation, and we stand in one in support of those men and women who bravely wear the uniform of the Australian Defence Force.
Next question. I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the government promised Australians before the election that no family will be worse off, but almost all families will be better off. Is the Prime Minister aware that Australians are getting less for every dollar they spend at the supermarket? The power prices continue to surge, that Australians are working more hours and getting less for it, and that in the month of May, a record 40% of mortgage holders struggle to pay their mortgage. Will this Prime Minister admit that Australian families and small businesses are worse off now than when his government was elected?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, we are very conscious of the fact that the global economy has softened due to supply chain issues relating to the post-pandemic recovery and also the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we're also very conscious of the fact of what we inherited, the largest deficit since the Second World War and $1 trillion of debt with little to show for it, sluggish economic growth, productivity sliding backwards, declining business investment, widespread skills shortages which were holding businesses back, a wages policy that was deliberately about keeping wages low, and more Australians than ever in insecure jobs. We are aware of that. And we're also aware that the largest increase in inflation this century was in the March 2022 quarter of 2.1%. Now, if you have 2.1% inflation, then that does have an impact. What also has an impact is if that is the context in which you are bringing down a budget, as those opposite did in March 2022, but at a time where inflation is the highest of any quarter this century, what they chose to do was to pour petrol on that fire. What they chose to do was try and buy their way through an election with a massive stimulus, which of course all ended once people had voted. Now, last week we had the figures of 0.8% CPI increase in the June quarter. Now, we would like to see that moderate further, but we acknowledge the fact that that is a moderation compared with where it has been, and certainly compared with the 2.1% that we inherited. but we do have a plan to combat inflation. It is about turning the $78 billion deficit into the first budget surplus in 15 years. That is what we have done. And banking that. The second is providing cost of living help that supports household budget without adding to inflation. Cheaper childcare, cheaper medicine, energy bill relief, affordable and social housing, strengthening the social safety net, all measures that those opposite oppose. And thirdly, investing in supply chain challenges, including the National Reconstruction Fund, skills and free take, infrastructure investment.
Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Macquarie.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Treasurer. What did the latest Consumer Price Index figures reveal, and how is the Albanese Labor government responding to the inflation challenge in our community?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for Macquarie, and if I could also acknowledge Carol Crean, her loss and the country's loss with the passing of Simon. Mr Speaker, we understand Australian households and small businesses are feeling the pressure of high prices and higher interest rates and global economic uncertainty. Inflation is still the main challenge in our economy, and that means that rolling out help with the cost of living is the major focus of our government. It's a key part of our three-point plan to get on top of this inflation challenge that we are confronting. First of all, taking the edge off these cost of living pressures without adding to inflation. Secondly, having a responsible approach to the budget, a bigger surplus at a time when the inflation challenge was most acute. And thirdly, investing in the supply chain challenges that have been a big part of inflation that we've seen so far. Now, last week, as the Prime Minister said, we did get the quarterly inflation numbers, which showed that price pressures in our economy are continuing to moderate. And as the PM said, on a quarterly basis, we saw inflation up 0.8%. That's less than half the quarterly peak that was posted in the March quarter 2022 under those opposite before the election. That's just the fact. And it's pleasing that inflation is easing in our economy, and while we'd prefer it moderate more quickly, it is the case that it is moderating faster than many economists expected. Now, the number one priority of this government, as I said, is getting on top of the inflation challenge and rolling out cost of living relief for Australians doing it tough. And that assistance is rolling out right now, and the benefits will continue to flow over the coming weeks and months. If you think about it, Mr Speaker, just this month we've eased the cost of early childhood education for 1.2 million families. We've begun rolling out energy price relief, up to $500 in bill relief for more than 5 million households and up to $650 for 1 million small businesses. And we've got a new tax incentive for up to 3.8 million small businesses to help them save on their energy bills. In September, we'll make medicines even cheaper by allowing people to buy 2 months' worth of supply for the price of a single subscription. And as the Minister for Social Services was talking about yesterday, we've got really important increases to working age payments, job seeker, youth allowance, and also the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance for 30 years if the safety net bill passes in this sitting. So, Mr Speaker, inflation, both here and around the world, is moderating in welcome ways. We're seeing welcome progress, but it will be higher than we'd like for longer than we would like. But our responsible cost of living policies are helping Australians through these difficult times. As we stare down this inflation challenge, we clean up the mess left behind by those opposite, and we lay the foundations for a stronger future together.
Give a call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Treasurer.
Order.
New Roy Morgan research has found that in the 3 months to June this year, 1.43 million Australians were at risk of mortgage stress. So why does the government's so-called wellbeing framework measure mortgage stress using data that ends in 2020? Why is this, Treasurer, so out of date and out of touch?
Order. The Minister for Climate Change. Order. The member for Deakin and the Minister for Climate Change will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, those opposite may not care about the well-being of our people and our communities, but we do. We do, Mr Speaker. And as the wellbeing framework that I released, Australia's first ever national wellbeing framework, as it acknowledged in the report, if the member had actually taken the time to read it, is that we acknowledge in the report that people are under the pump. And one of the reasons why people are under additional pressure is because interest rates started going up before the election and continued after the election, for all of the reasons that intelligent people in this parliament are aware of, Mr. Speaker. And so he can ask all the questions he likes. It takes quite a bit of effort to get him out of his hole, Mr. Speaker, and ask a question. I think he's asked one question about the budget in the months since the budget was handed down, and so I'm happy to take his questions. Now, when it comes to the cost of living more broadly, and he asks me about the pressure on Australian families from higher interest rates and inflation, which peaked in quarterly terms on their watch, and the global economic uncertainty that we are seeing. Now, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons why this is the least coherent, least convincing and least credible opposition on the economy in living memory is that it took them 80 days to tell us how much their budget reply cost. Now, Phileas Fogg got around the world in 80 days, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
It took 80 days for those opposite to tell us how much their policies will cost.
The Treasurer will pause for a moment. Order. Whoever's interjecting can cease that immediately, and I'll hear from the member for Hume on a point of order.
On relevance, the question was very specific. It asked why the wellbeing framework was so out of date and out of touch.
Order. Order. The Leader of the Nationals, the member for New England. Treasurer in continuation.
Mr. Speaker, as I acknowledged at the start of the question, the wellbeing framework itself says that Australians are under pressure. One of the sources of that pressure is higher interest rates. We've made that clear. And one of the reasons why we are so serious about this wellbeing framework is because we want to make sure that the data that we rely on to make good decisions in our economy is as good as it can be. We will continue to refine the wellbeing framework in ways that I said on the day that it was released. But, Mr. Speaker, I tell you what won't be happening.
Order. Members
We
on my
won't be
left,
taking lectures.
Riverina.
We won't be taking lectures about the economy from the party where we have the Leader of the Opposition that says we should be spending more on cost of living help. The Shadow Treasurer says we should be spending less on cost of living help. And then we've got the Shadow Finance Minister who said that she read one of my speeches and said I was heading in the right direction. Mr. Speaker, they've got three different spokespeople and three very different positions. Their time would be much better spent getting some coherence and some credibility in their approach to the economy. It has been entirely missing. Now, we have spent a big chunk of our first year in office trying to clean up the mess that they left of the economy and the budget. And if you look at the scoreboard, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the scoreboard, you've got unemployment at 3.5%. You've got the first surplus in 15 years. We're rolling out cost of living help, and inflation is moderating from the quarterly peak that we saw under the incompetence that we look at now opposite.
The member for Cooper. The member for Corangamite has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Since the Parliament last met, what steps has the Albanese Labor government taken to ease the pressure on families, and what is standing in the way of providing relief to vulnerable Australians?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Corangamite for her question, and I acknowledge the work that she does representing the great people of regional Victoria. We are working as a government for Australia every day. Working for Australia is our theme of what we are doing each and every day going forward, working to take pressure off people whilst not putting pressure on inflation. Since the last sitting of Parliament, 8 of our urgent care clinics have opened. I've opened 2 of them, meaning more people can get the care they need when they need it for free. You've got the Medicare bulk billing incentive being tripled. You've had changes to paid parental leave have helped 20,000 families, and our cheaper childcare plan is making a difference for 1.2 million families. Now, the CommBank's Economic Insights noted this. The changes to the childcare subsidy are expected to see a 32% decline in out-of-pocket expenses for households. It's worth noting that cheaper childcare for families will also, in the medium term, put downward pressure on inflation pressures in the economy. Mr Speaker, the interjections show you how much they disagree with cheaper childcare, But we're also getting wages moving. Since July 1, 2.7 million workers on awards have received a 5.75% pay increase, the largest increase since 2009. 250,000 aged care workers have got a 15% pay rise, meaning a nurse on an award wage can earn an extra $10,000 a year. And this week,
the member for
the
Deakin
Senate will
cease
take up
interjecting.
the Strengthening the Safety Net Bill. Now, this can provide meaningful relief for vulnerable Australians starting in September, raising the age cut-off for the parenting payment single, providing direct relief to 57,000 single parents, predominantly women, an increase in rental assistance for 1.1 million households, and increases in JobSeeker, Austudy and Youth Allowance, helping 1.1 million Australians. But those opposite have announced they want to block this relief. They had their own plan that it took them forever to come up with that will actually put a conservative 50,000 additional people onto JobSeeker. That's what their plan will do. No wonder they didn't want to put out the costings. The party of robo-debt at it again, attacking the most vulnerable, not worrying about those people who are doing it tough. They haven't learned, they won't change, and Australians will pay the price.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Victorians are paying a fortune for electricity because of the massive increases in gas and coal prices, while fossil fuel corporations are making windfall profits. Will you rip up your undercooked petroleum resources rent tax and instead introduce a fair and progressive tax on fossil fuels so we can put downward pressure on inflation and invest more in renewables, which are the cheapest source of energy?
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Thank you to the member for Kooyong for her question. We intend to proceed with the design of the PRRT changes, which were one of the features of the May budget. And the reason for that is because this is the best way to make sure that the offshore LNG industry pays more tax sooner. And we are talking here about $2.4 billion in additional tax to help us fund, whether it's the improvements to the bulk billing incentive, whether it's the cost of living assistance that is rolling out right now. That $2.4 billion will make a substantial contribution to that. Now, as the honourable member knows, the process that led up to this policy change has been a long one before the life of this government, and it culminated in some advice from Treasury, which has been in the news and which is why I suspect the honourable member is asking the question today. The Treasury provided three options, and of the three options in the final Treasury advice, the one that I chose actually raises the most money over the forward estimates than the other alternatives in the options presented to us. That's an important consideration as well, Mr Speaker, and to the honourable member who asked the question. Now, we want to see the offshore LNG industry pay more tax sooner. We've come up with a way, with the help of the Treasury and on the recommendation of the Treasury, to ensure that we can do that while protecting our international relationships and protecting the jobs in the sector, and recognising that gas will play a role as a transition fuel as we embark on this net zero transformation, which I personally believe passionately in, as do the colleagues on this side of the House. So $2.4 billion that we wouldn't see without these efforts, based on the Treasury recommendation, the three options presented to me, and I think a good return for the Australian taxpayer sooner, so that we can fund the things that we truly value in our society, whether it be healthcare, whether it be cost of living help, whether it be rent assistance, whether it be building more social and affordable homes, all of the things that we need to do. Some of this money, or this money, will help offset some of those important priorities.
call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Workplace Relations. Amidst the ongoing FAIR campaign about the government's workplace relations reform, can the minister clarify the Albanese Labor government's record on employment and wages outcomes?
Give the call to the minister. Order. The member for Page is warned. Give the call to the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyons, someone who's always working for regional Tasmania. It's worth considering, with the fear campaigns that he referred to in the question, what we actually had those opposite predict about our workplace reforms. What did they say would occur? The Leader of the Opposition said it's going to result in a higher unemployment rate. Senator Henderson said this is a job destroyer. Senator Cash was more nuanced and said it would close down Australia. And what do we have now is an unemployment rate at 3.5%, a participation rate at 66.8%. We are just shy now of 500,000 new jobs since this government came to office. And the feature as to what's happened to those jobs, because this government said we wanted to see more secure jobs, what we have now, 85% of those new jobs are full-time jobs. 85%. You have a situation in our first 12 months, 54% of all new jobs that were created were women going into full-time work. And this is where what the government has done with respect to cheaper childcare intersects with what we've done with workforce flexibility, intersects with what we've done with job security, and is delivering those sorts of job security outcomes that those opposite predicted the opposite of. But it's worth even more bizarre are what were their wages predictions compared to what we're getting now. The 2014 budget, the Leader of the Opposition will remember the 2014 budget. It's the one when he tried to abolish bulk billing. Now, the 2014 budget was the one where they predicted then that unemployment would get a 3 in front of it. It would be wage growth. Sorry, wage growth would be 3. The following year would be 3%, and by the end of government, they ended up predicting they'd get 3.25% wage growth. How did they go across those years where they were predicting 3? 2.6, 2.1, 2.1, 1.9, 2.1. 2.3, 1.8, 1.8. What do we have now? 3.7. And what's the difference?
Order.
Under them,
Order.
Low wage growth was a deliberate design feature of their management of the economy. When you change the policies to deliver wage growth, look at what happens. Wages grow. 5.75% changing on awards right now for 2.7 million workers. For people in aged care, a 15% increase in their wages. Wage increases that those opposite, always opposed, voted against, but this government delivers.
Order. Before I call the Leader of the Nationals, there's far too much noise in that answer. The member for Deakin, O'Connor and Hume are warned. There won't be any second chances today. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. Will the minister rule out federal cultural heritage reforms that require individual farming businesses to undertake mandatory cultural surveys to conduct agricultural practices on their private property?
Give a call to the Minister for the Environment and the Minister for Water.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm delighted to receive this question from the Leader of the National Party and to say what a great thing it has been to inherit this work. I don't often say this about the former Minister for the Environment, but to inherit these cultural heritage reforms at the very advanced stage that we've inherited them. What we're aiming to do as a government is to make sure that we have better protection for First Nations heritage and more certainty for business and for farmers and for other land users. These two twin objectives came out of some very substantial work done after the destruction of Juukan Gorge in 2 inquiries led by the member for Leichhardt. And I thank him and the committee for the excellent work they did coming out of Juukan Gorge. Now, if I could just take the parliament back for a moment to remind people of what happened there. A 46,000-year-old sacred site was destroyed by a mining company. And the tragedy of that was irreplaceable heritage lost legally. It was done legally. And what this parliament realised was that our laws were not fit for purpose. If 46,000-year-old sacred sites can be destroyed legally, those laws are not fit for purpose. So the previous government, coming out of those Juukan Gorge inquiries that had a number of very substantial recommendations, set up a process with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. The former Minister for the Environment signed a contract with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance to come up with an options paper. That options paper is, as I say, the work began under those opposite. We have released the options paper. Options papers are designed to begin conversations, and can I say that the Minister for the Environment said very clearly that starting this national conversation was exactly the right thing to do.
You know that. Order. The member for Petrie. The Leader of the Nationals on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, on relevance, it was very tight about whether the minister will rule out mandatory cultural surveys for agricultural practice. No one is challenging what happened with the gorge.
Okay.
This is agricultural practices, and it was very specific. No matter what former government did, it's what this government will do about will they rule out, because there was no decision made.
The Leader will resume his seat. The question order, the Prime Minister will cease interjecting. The Minister is being relevant to the question because she was talking about the heritage reforms. I'm listening to her. The Minister for Infrastructure will cease interjecting. Just going to listen carefully for the remaining 35 seconds. She is being relevant to the question, so she's relevant to the standing orders.
I thank the Leader of the Nationals for his intervention. Just to reassure him, we're not proposing any takeover of state laws. We're not proposing any duplication of state laws.
Order.
Heritage protection will predominantly remain a matter for states and territories. What we're seeking to do is to update our First Nations cultural heritage protections as those opposites suggested we should do, as 2 Juukan Gorge inquiries led by the member for Leichhardt suggested, as the work begun by the former Minister for the Environment
has concluded. The member for Forrest will cease interjecting, so I can hear from the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. When can the people in my electorate of Werriwa expect to receive some cost of living relief delivered through the Albanese Labor government strengthening the safety net package?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Werriwa for her question. Of course, our government knows that many Australians are doing it tough right now. And that's why we've outlined in our budget cost of living relief for millions of Australians, cost of living relief that's responsible and cost of living relief that is targeted. And through our $14.6 billion cost of living relief plan, the government has a plan to help millions of Australians in different circumstances and different settings. This, of course, includes relief from power bills, cheaper medicines, historic investment into Medicare, and, of course, our families are benefiting from our cheaper childcare plan and enhanced paid parental leave. But one of our key focuses of our cost of living package is to help those doing it toughest. and improvements that we announced in the budget to many income support payments delivered through our Strengthening Safety Net Bill are currently before the Senate, and they will do some really important things. They will increase support for eligible working age payments and student payments. They will extend the eligibility for job seekers to the higher rate to help more older Australians that face long-term unemployment, often as a result of discrimination or sickness. It extends the eligibility for parenting payment signal to help more single parents, 57,000 extra single parents getting extra support. And of course, it's providing the largest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years. Combined, these measures will give around 2 million Australians on income support extra assistance. And I'm pleased to inform the member who asked the question, but all members of the House, that this support will flow from the 20th of September, very soon, 7 short weeks. But that is, of course, if the bill passes the Senate. And, of course, I woke up this morning surprised to see that those opposite are deciding to block our safety net bill. They are wanting to deny those on the lowest incomes an increase of $40 a fortnight. This is outrageous, and it shows what heartless people they are. Of course, they want to block our rent assistance. They want to block our increase to single parenting payment. They want to block extra support for those over 55, because that's what our bill does. It provides important cost of living relief. So it is time that those opposite stop playing politics with that. Stop playing politics with those that need our help. Get out of the way in the Senate. Let the bill pass.
Concluded.
And
Give the order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. This month, the Prime Minister told Ben Fordham that the Voice, quote, is not about a treaty. But in May, the Prime Minister said that treaty and truth-telling are, quote, very much part of the next phase. And one of the things that a Voice would be able to do is talk about Makarrata, the need for agreement-making and coming together after a conflict, end quote. Why did this tricky Prime Minister say one thing to one group of Australians and completely the opposite to another?
I give the order. Members on my right and left, I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the member for her question, and I thank whoever was interjected about my T-shirt. Because, yes, Mr. Speaker, Ben Fordham has exposed the fact that at a Midnight Oil concert I wore a Midnight Oil T-shirt. I know, Mr. Speaker.
Order.
I know, Mr. Speaker. Hold the front page. Hold the front page.
Order.
At the Oil's last ever concert, I wore an Oil's T-shirt.
How dare you?
And what I said on Ben Fordham, Mr. Speaker, was that the referendum isn't about treaty and isn't about truth. It's about one thing. It's about one thing.
Order.
It is about voice. It's about recognition, and it's about listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people so that we get better results. That's what it's about. But the opponents of the Voice, you wonder why, because the member who asked the question said this on Insiders on the 23rd of July. She said this, firstly, 1, I want to see constitutional recognition of our first Australians. Well, we're all agreed there, Mr. Speaker. So tick, tick. Tick, tick.
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. The Minister for Climate Change will cease interjecting. The Deputy Order. The Deputy Leader will be heard in silence for her point of order.
It's a point of order on relevance, Mr. Speaker. There was no T-shirt in the question. There was no quote from me in the question. There were your own words, Prime Minister, in the question, and your own contradiction about treaty or no treaty.
You may resume your seat. Prime Minister is referring to comments he made on the radio station, and I would suggest interjections are highly disorderly, so do not interject so the Prime Minister won't respond to the interjections. The Prime Minister has the call.
I'm speaking about what this referendum is about, and it strikes me that the opponents of the referendum, those who are advocating a no vote, want to talk about everything but what the question is about. Recognition, listening in order to get better results. That is what it is about. But the Deputy Leader went on to say this about the voice, because she was asked, and she said this: the voice is important in the way that it may close the gap. In a way, it may improve the lives of Indigenous people. Well, we agree with that too. So then you wonder why it is that they're not supporting it. And they come up with the idea that it's about legislation. And they say this. She said this: all legislation requires exposure drafts. That's why she said couldn't answer what the ledge was there. It requires conversations. It requires debate. I mean, it will include all the things that actually produce good legislation at the end of the process. And that's what I want to see. Well, a yes referendum will see the voice then legislated before this parliament as a result of that good process. That's the whole point here. Those opposite so desperate to make a political point at the expense of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so desperate, want to talk about everything but what is in the referendum in the last quarter of this year.
Order. It's far too much noise. I'd like to hear from the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How are the Albanese Labor government's changes to make early learning more affordable, which came into effect earlier this month, benefiting Australian families by delivering real, responsible cost-of-living relief?
Good question.
To the call to the Minister for Early Childhood Education, the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and may I thank the member for Bennelong for his question. It demonstrates just how incredibly passionate he is about supporting families in Bennelong and ensuring that they can give their children the very best start in life. Mr Speaker, since we were last here in this House, the Albanese government's increase to the childcare subsidy means that more than 1.2 million families with children in care are better off. That includes around 9,400 families in the electorate of Bennelong. These are changes that our Prime Minister announced as opposition leader and a policy that we took to the election. This government delivers on our promises, and we put the needs of Australian families first. And that's why we made the changes. That's why we made the changes to the childcare subsidy, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because we know that making early childhood education and care more affordable pays a triple dividend. It provides real cost of living relief to parents and families. It gives children access to those transformational benefits of early learning. And, importantly, it drives productivity, boosting our economy. These changes are benefiting families right now across the country, and this morning the Minister for Education, Minister Clare, and I had the absolute pleasure of meeting the Ramirez-Pendleton family and their beautiful daughter, Paloma. So the parents, Blanca and Chris, and their adorable 3-year-old Paloma, told us just how impactful these changes have been for them. They can now afford to send Paloma to full-time early learning. That's an extra day that they've gained because of the Albanese government's changes to the childcare subsidy. This means that the mother, Blanca, can now pick up an extra day of work. That is a huge change to the family and a huge benefit to them. It gives them greater flexibility. It puts more money into their household budget. Now, families like this right across Australia, we know, are also benefiting from our changes. Families like Blanca, Chris and Paloma are benefiting from these reforms. And the Albanese government will continue to make families like theirs a priority by providing real and responsible
cost of living relief in our budget and in every measure that we take, whilst also laying the foundations for a better future for our children, children like 3-year-old Paloma, and a better future for our country.
Call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. If Australians vote for the Voice, the Makarrata Commission will be established. Can the Minister inform the House how the Makarrata Commission will work?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Separate issue.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question. The referendum later this year is about constitutional recognition through a voice. It's not about anything else. Right. Later this year, we will all be asked a simple question, and it will go like this. Do you support a change to the Constitution to recognise the first peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice? The referendum is to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through a voice. Those opposite are trying to muddy the waters. The role of the voice will be to provide advice on how best to improve outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Advice on things like health, education, jobs and housing. It's about constitutional recognition that gets concrete results.
The call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering cheaper medicines, and why is the government determined to provide further cost of living relief to families?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Fremantle for his question. He's a passionate advocate for better health care in his community and for Labor's promise of cheaper medicines. And, Mr Speaker, already we're delivering on that promise. Last July, we cut the maximum amount that millions of pensioners and concession card holders would pay for their medicines across a year by 25%. So no matter how many medicines they're on, the most they'll pay across the year is an average of just $5 a week. In September, we cut the price of 2,000 brands of medicine, delivering $130 million back into the pockets of hard-working patients. And, Mr Speaker, on January 1st, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, slashing the maximum payment from $42 a script to just $30. And already, Mr Speaker, in just 6 months, that has delivered almost $120 million in savings to hard-working Australian patients. But, Mr Speaker, we know, and the member for Fremantle knows, there's more to do, especially during a global cost of living shock like we're living through right now. And that's why we have accepted the advice that's been there for 5 years from the medicines experts to allow 60-day prescriptions for ongoing health conditions at the same price as a 30-day script. This will halve the cost of 300 medicines for 6 million patients, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, 30-day scripts make sense for a one-off course of medicine for a bout, for example, of an infectious disease. They make absolutely no sense at all for stable patients who are on the same medicines year in, year out, decade in, decade out, sometimes for the entire life. And that's why pretty much every patient group, Mr Speaker, has supported our policy. It will also free up millions of GP consults, which we all know are desperately needed right now, which is why every doctors' group supports our policy. And, Mr Speaker, we have promised to reinvest every single dollar that the government saves from this measure back into community pharmacy. And on Friday, I announced the last details of that reinvestment, which will be focused on small rural pharmacies. But against all of that, Mr Speaker, all of the expert advice, the policy logic, the support of every patient group and every doctor group, I read in the Australian newspaper this morning that the opposition is going to try to block cheaper medicines in the Senate for 6 million patients. Now, perhaps No surprise, Mr Speaker, from the Leader of the Opposition, who as Health Minister, we all remember, tried to jack up the price of medicines, $5 for each and every script. But I tell you, Mr Speaker, we're determined to deliver on our commitment. Cheaper medicines are good for the hip pocket and they're good for health.
Give the call. Order. The member for Moreton. Give the call to the member for Goldstein.
To the Prime Minister, I and others on the crossbench have called for a royal commission into offshore processing. Now we learn that the Department of Home Affairs continued to award contracts involving millions in taxpayers' money, despite being warned by the AFP that the businessman involved was under investigation for bribery. He was subsequently charged and convicted. Will the Prime Minister refer this matter to the NAC and/or institute a royal commission or some other form of broader independent inquiry into offshore processing?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for her question. I say this not about the specific but the general. We need to avoid the idea that every politician will say to every issue, refer to the NAC. It's easy. The NAC will operate independently and at arm's length. So I have said consistently, but I say to members in this House as well, they need to avoid this temptation to say, oh, I'll be referred to the NAC over every issue that is raised. Now, these are serious issues and allegations that have been raised. We are acting quickly and decisively, and it is appropriate that an independent, eminent reviewer have a look at what has occurred, that departmental officials be obligated to cooperate if instructed to do so, and the ministers and people at the time, including the Leader of the Opposition, cooperate with an inquiry. Today we have announced that we will appoint Mr Dennis Richardson AC, a former Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Department of Defence and Director-General of Security, someone I think is one of Australia's preeminent public servants, to have a full look and a thorough examination of this. The review will consider governance practices and these allegations in the wider context of serious issues that have emerged over this time. In particular, it will consider any integrity concerns about contracting arrangements regarding regional processing, whether public or otherwise, as well as the department's governance arrangements, not just to look at what's happened in the past, but to make sure that appropriate mechanisms are put in place in the future. I ask the Minister for Home Affairs to add to the answer.
Thank you, Speaker, and could I acknowledge the member for Goldstein's long-standing advocacy around integrity of government, and it's a passion that's very much shared by those of us on this side of the chamber. You saw one of the first actions of our government was to legislate for a National Anti-Corruption Commission, and you're a key advocate in that, so I just want to acknowledge that. The Prime Minister has covered quite comprehensively, I think, the response of the government here, but if I can fill in a few details. So the Parliament is aware there are very concerning allegations on the public record with regard to the management of offshore processing. The government is deeply concerned about those. As soon as these matters were raised, I asked the Home Affairs Department to look thoroughly at the current regional processing arrangements to ensure that they are legal and appropriate, and I've received that assurance from my department. In terms of the historic allegations, it is absolutely clear that these warrant further investigation. They're serious allegations and there is serious money involved, and no one is going to get to the bottom of this like Dennis Richardson is. Thank you.
Give a call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. How is the Albanese Labor government working to ensure that more Australians have access to safe and affordable housing? And what is blocking further progress?
Give a call to the Minister for Small Business, the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Newcastle for her interest in this matter and for the work she's been doing in her local community. I know that she knows that more housing is desperately needed, particularly social housing in her community. And, of course, we do have a broad housing agenda as a new Labor government, Mr Speaker, and it is very broad and it's also ambitious. But it's achievable, Mr Speaker. but three bills that are central to our agenda were blocked by the Senate in the last parliamentary sitting. They are, of course, our $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund bill, our Supply and Affordability Council bill and our bill to create Housing Australia. These three bills were blocked in the Senate by, of course, the Liberals, the Nationals and the Greens coming together to block these bills, which will deliver more housing for Australians that need it most. And this is an opportunity for people to get out and about in their electorates and to talk to people, particularly people who have been in public and social housing recently. We're talking about here 30,000 new social homes in the first 5 years of the fund. 4,000 of those for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence and for older women over 55. And during the break I had the opportunity to go to Burnie to meet with some residents, new residents, who'd been in this new social housing, one of them for 1 week and one for 2 weeks. And I particularly want to talk about Laurie. Laurie had been homeless for 2 years before getting into her new home just 2 weeks ago. And she said to me, "I have spent all of my time and my energy each and every day for the last 2 years just finding somewhere to sleep. And I have spent every bit of energy in trying to work out what I am going to eat because I have no home." Now, Laura Lee has been put into one of these new homes, I'm pleased to say, and I asked her what she's going to do now, and she said, "I'm going to go back to school." Mr Speaker, she's a 40-year-old woman who's so proud of her new home, and that's what this means. These are homes for people who desperately need it, Mr Speaker. These are homes that we want to build. When I talk to the community housing provider Housing Choices, they want to build more of these homes. When the Prime Minister and I spoke to community housing provider Blue Chip, who had also put people into new social homes, they want to build more of these homes. They are saying the Housing Australia Future Fund is critical to getting more of these types of homes on the ground. So I say to the Liberals, the Nationals and the Greens, go out and talk to some of the people who are currently sitting on public housing waiting lists about what it will mean to them. You are blocking homes when we want to build homes. Why are you standing in the way of getting more homes on the ground for Australians that need them most when we've got so many housing challenges today?
Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. According to the website ullarustatement.org, the Uluru Statement from the Heart calls for the establishment of a Makarrata Commission for the purpose of treaty making. So I ask, can the Minister inform the House how the Makarrata Commission will work?
Order. Give the call. Order. Order. Prime Minister on a point of order.
Yes, Mr Speaker. The member for Bradfield asked a question quoting from a website that is not a government website and then asked her view of the minister's view of that government website.
The question goes to a website that I certainly don't know the contents of. Order. Well, I don't. The minister cannot be responsible for every website in the country or the world, for that matter. I'm just going to ask the manager to rephrase this question to make sure it is within the purvey of the minister's responsibilities, which is the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Well, Mr Speaker, the minister does squarely have responsibility for these matters, but to assist the House, I'll be very happy to rephrase the question. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. At the Garma Festival last year, she said, quotes, "The Uluru Statement talks about an enshrined voice in the Constitution, but it also talks about the establishment of a Makarrata Commission." She also said, quotes, "The Prime Minister was very clear that we will embrace and implement the Uluru Statement in full," close quotes. So I ask the Minister again, how will the Makarrata Commission work?
The question is in order regarding the minister's statements. I give her the call. The Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
Completely different question.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart
Because you're so generous of spirit.
was a simple and generous request. A request that was made by over 250 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander delegates at the Uluru Convention in 2017, after dialogues with the community right across the country. The first thing that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people asked for at Uluru was constitutional recognition through a voice. This is an idea that came from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, not from politicians. The Australian people will have the opportunity later this year to make the voice a reality. This referendum is about recognition, listening and better results. It's about making a practical difference in the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians in areas like health, education, jobs and employment.
Order. Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government drawing on Indigenous knowledge and expertise to manage and restore Australia's environment, and what lessons can we learn from these programs?
Give the call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I really want to thank the member for Lingiari for showing me a really good time in the Northern Territory last week. I travelled up and met with her to announce our government's commitment to adding 10 new Indigenous protected areas to our national estate. This will add millions of hectares to the land that will be protected for nature as part of our national estate. I was with the member for Lingiari at the Katiti-Peterman protected area next to the Uluru-Katajuta National Park in the beautiful red heart of our country. This is such a treat to be able to spend a day on country with Indigenous rangers on an Indigenous protected area, people who know their land like no one else does, people who are better prepared to care for that land than anyone else. We heard about the cultural burning work that the rangers are doing to reduce the intensity of bushfires. We heard about their work on feral species management, in particular cats and camels that are causing so much destruction there in the centre, and working too to deal with invasive plants like buffel grass, which competes with native grasses, destroys the habitat of the animals that live in the area and, of course, burns very hot, contributes to those very destructive wildfires. Mr Speaker, these IPAs are a terrific homegrown success story. They already cover 87 million hectares of land and 5 million hectares of sea. But what is important about them is how they are managed. Now, we spoke to rangers there, listened to their expertise, listened to their love of country. They also made the very good point that where you've got Indigenous protected areas managed by Indigenous rangers, you get better environmental outcomes. You also get better economic outcomes. I had one of the rangers say to me, look, it just makes no sense. We had young people here sitting around being paid unemployment benefits. Instead now they're earning more at the same time they're contributing more economically to their local community. They're also contributing more to the environmental protections of their, around their local community. And so I'm also delighted to be announcing this week with the Minister for Indigenous Affairs the doubling of the number of Indigenous ranger positions that this government will support. This is an important environmental measure. It's an important economic measure as well. And it just shows that when we talk to people about the things that are important in their lives and important in their communities, we get better decisions. That's what the voice is all about. It's about acknowledgement and it's about listening for better results.
Has concluded. Give the call to the member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, Europe is burning and Australians remember our own Black Summer with fear for the future. The UN Secretary-General has said we have entered a period of global boiling. Do you agree with his assessment? And if so, why does your government continue to approve new coal mines, continue to delay crucial reform to environmental laws and still hasn't delivered a national risk assessment?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank the member for Wentworth for her question. And I certainly agree that climate change is real, that science has been settled and that we need to respond as a globe to climate change. It would appear to be the case that July is likely to be the hottest month experienced on record, and here in Australia as well. For people who have experienced a July that is unusually dry and unusually hot compared with what has occurred in the past, we know that it is having an impact here. And we know that the warnings of scientists are tragically proving to be correct, that extreme weather events are more intense and more frequent. And last week I was with the member for Gilmore down at Ulladulla, meeting with people engaged with land care, but also meeting people who lost their homes in the bushfires of 2019-2020. And I did that in part to talk publicly about the need for preparation for the upcoming season. People need to take precautions very early on, much earlier on than they would have anticipated, because what we've been through with the massive fires in 2019-2020, which saw indeed some rainforests burn for the first time since scientists could ascertain how long they'd been in existence for, we saw unprecedented activities. This was not business as usual. And that's why people on the ground are certainly responding, and governments need to respond with them. They need to respond through mitigation and through those measures that are important, preparedness. But we also need to prepare with a policy response. And that's why my government has enshrined in legislation net zero by 2050, a 43% reduction by 2030, while we're working with our Pacific neighbours, but also working globally through the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, to have a comprehensive plan of being a part of the world solution, encouraging our neighbours to move as well. It is important at the same time that we bring the community with us as well. These things take time. You've had a decade of denial. You can't just flick the switch. You need to make sure that people continue to have access to reliable energy, and we are doing so whilst we transition in a way that is in the interests of Australia, but indeed.
Give the call to the honourable member for Lalor.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. What did the Royal Commission into Robodebt's final report find as to who was responsible for the design, development and establishment of the cruel and unlawful scheme? And were there any other important observations made by the Commissioner?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
Prior to the 2022 election, the Albanese opposition promised Robodebt victims that we would have a Royal Commission into Robodebt if elected. The Royal Commission has now concluded. There were 46 days of public hearings. Over 100 people gave evidence. On the 7th of July, Commissioner Holmes handed down her final report. The government is considering the 57 recommendations that it contained. Commissioner Holmes forensically examined who was responsible for the design, the development and establishment of the Robodebt scheme. The Royal Commission outlined how successive former Liberal governments, despite repeated warnings, continued to break the law, victimising vulnerable Australians. The Royal Commission goes to the role of the member for Cook, who was Social Services Minister, who first took Robodebt to Cabinet in 2015. The member for Cook, in a press release on the 12th of May 2015, said, "We'll put a strong welfare cop on the beat to track down suspected welfare fraud." Under oath at the Royal Commission in December 2022, the member for Cook's evidence was that income averaging, the process underpinning the unlawful Robodebt scheme, was a foundational way that the then Department of Human Services worked. However, Commissioner Holmes found in the final report at page 102. The Commission rejects as untrue Mr Morrison's evidence that he was told that income averaging as contemplated by the executive minute was an established practice and a foundational way. She goes on to say at page 106, Mr Morrison knew the use of income averaging was the primary basis of the new approach described in the executive minute, and the DSS had advised DHS that the legislative change was required to implement the proposal. She continues, the new policy, the NPP, represented a complete reversal of the legal position without explanation. Mr Morrison was not entitled, without further question, to rely upon the contradictory content of the NPP on the question of the DSS legal position. The Royal Commission went on to say Mr Morrison allowed Cabinet to be misled because he did not make that obvious inquiry. She continues, he failed to meet his ministerial responsibility to ensure that the Cabinet was properly informed about what the proposal actually entailed and to ensure that it was lawful. I note that Mr Morrison has disputed the Royal Commission findings. He may have convinced himself, but he failed to convince the Royal Commission and indeed most Australians.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Just going to deal with a few members who have indicated they are seeking the call. I'll start with the member for Mackellar.
Mr Speaker, understanding Order 105, I ask if you can write to the Minister for Infrastructure to seek reasons for the delay in answering the question in writing, question 107, that I asked of the Minister on the 9th of May 2023.
I shall write to the Minister as the standing order provides. And I'll go to the member for Grey, who's indicated the call.
Mr Speaker, just at the moment I can't lay my hands on the correct notes.
We might come back to the member for Grey. We'll go to the member for Groom.
Thank you, Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 105B, I wish to draw your attention to two overdue questions in writing, questions 149 and 148, both regarding the Railway Parklands project. Mr Speaker, can I ask that you write to the Minister of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government and seek her explanation as to why she's chosen not to answer my questions in writing within 60 days.
I'll give the call to the member for New England.
Mr Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 105B, I wish to draw your attention to 10 overdue questions in writing. Question 144, 143, 142, 141, 139, 138, 137, 136, 135 and 128. Questions 143 and 144 relate to the finalising of the awarding of the Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, with just over 2 weeks to go to the formal commemoration of the 50th anniversary of Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War. These veterans deserve a timely answer. Question 136 through to 142 should be easy for this government to answer. They are who in the Department of Veteran Affairs and the Australian War Memorial are considered members of the executive government.
The member will indicate the questions and not give commentary.
Mr Speaker, can I ask you that you write to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development and Local Government and the Minister for Veterans Affairs, respectively, and seek their explanation as to why they have chosen not to answer my questions in the written 60 days.
I shall write to the ministers as the standing orders provide. Now go to the members for Grey.
Thank you for your tolerance, Mr Speaker. I'd ask that I draw your attention to the questions I wrote to the Minister for Resources over 60 days ago, question 105. It concerned federal court rulings in the case of the Kimber Council Glass versus the Bungala Determination Aboriginal Corporation and the awarding of costs against that corporation. The government underwrote the Kimber Council and as this stage not elected not to pursue those costs, and that you pursue an answer.
Just for the benefit of members, when asking me, just require either the question, not the commentary, but I shall write to the Minister as the standing orders provide. Before I call the Leader of the House, I present the Auditor General's audit report. Oh, the member for... Yeah, I'll get to the member for Brisbane. I just need to get through documents and papers. Everyone will get a turn. I present the Auditor-General's Audit Reports number 41 to 45 for 2022 to 23. Details of the reports will be recorded in the votes and proceedings. And now I call the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Speaker. These documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members earlier today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.